Implementation planning. Once our system has been tested, it's time to plan for the implementation of that system. This requires, of course, approval from management. No system should go into production, or no change to a system or application should be moved into production without the stated and documented approval from management for that change. When management approves then that implementation, they are accepting the risk of that implementation, the risk that that may pose to the system or to the entire organization if that system is to be implemented. This is often called then the systems authorization process, something we're going to look at in just a moment. We then need to plan our rollout. Planning the rollout means that we schedule it at a time which is convenient for the business, a time when not on the busiest day of the year, for example, and a time when the business has been alerted, the users know about this change or about this new system. Not every implementation goes perfectly, so we should always have a fallback, a rollback strategy. What happens if this implementation didn't work? Can we roll back to a known good point? Can we roll back to how the system used to be? Now, this can be very difficult with some systems. Some systems we require a hard cutover, and there's really almost no going back, and that's always a nervous time. In other cases, we may do a pilot of maybe implementing several systems in several locations, but with backup so we could just rebuild those if necessary. And by only doing it in a few locations, at least we still have the core functionality working in other places. We need to make sure that the users are trained in the use of this new system. They know how the system will work, and they're able then to ensure that our systems will actually be functional. Now, obviously, we anticipate there's always going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be a little bit of, well, wait a second here. People are not going to be as efficient as they might like to be, and in some cases they'll long for the old system, even though it was not as good, just because of the learning curve involved. Make sure that training has been done. Make sure that people are familiar with the functionality of the new system, but also have people there for support for those first few bitter days when we're trying to get this new system or modification working. We notify of the change. We notify all of the relevant stakeholders that this change has been proposed. We also, of course, at the end, notify management once it has been done. When it comes to data migration, this is a point of risk. What happens when the data is being moved from an old system to a new one, where maybe the format of the data has changed, the size of the data fields? Is there the chance that during the migration we might actually impact the integrity of our data? There certainly is, therefore, a risk of data corruption. Well, maybe some data was lost, some of it was incomplete, or the actual transition of it didn't actually preserve then the accuracy of that data. We need to validate whether or not our migration plan was complete. Were there some records or files that were lost during the migration? We validate that the data is still in the correct format. This is especially difficult if we're dealing with things like phone numbers and other types of, say, dates of the year. These are fields that very often can be in different formats on different systems. And we need to validate to make sure that we do it consistently, that during that migration, we didn't move from one type of format into another. When we do a rollout, often in a pilot, or we do a phased rollout, one of the most difficult things is the synchronization of data between systems. We have some data that's being done on the old system and some transactions being done on the new system. And we need to make sure that that synchronization is maintained all the way through the rollout to make sure we don't lose transactions that were done on the old system, for example. The other problem, of course, is that during the transition, is there a chance that maybe somebody saw the data that shouldn't have? Has there been a breach of confidentiality? Or maybe during the transition, the data was unavailable for an unacceptable length of time. We have to plan our implementation in a way to ensure that we continue to support critical business functions. So there are several different ways to do a cutover. Well, probably the safest and the one we always wish we could do would be to run in parallel. We run the old system and we run the new system at the same time. The only real difficulty here is data synchronization, and of course it's fairly expensive to run both systems, with the demand on personnel, for example. But this is probably the least risky of any of the cutover techniques. We get the new system up and running, we make sure it's working correctly before we turn off the old system. And this parallel process helps us to ensure that even if problems are found with a new system, well, we still, if necessary, could revert back to the older system. We also then have the idea of a phased changeover. This could be done as a pilot or as a phased rollout that we do, for example, if we've got many sites, we'll do several sites at a time so we can make sure it works correctly at these sites before we then do it at other locations. The idea of a phased changeover also brings in the problem, though, of data synchronization, and very much brings in also this whole idea that in some cases, some parts of the business are running on the old system, some are running on the new, and that can sometimes be a little bit of challenges when it comes to working together and cooperation between different departments as well. Probably the most risky type of a cutover is the hard, abrupt cutover, where we basically just turn on the new system and turn off the old simultaneously. The idea behind a hard or abrupt cutover is that we're going to be able to set up our systems now so that there's a complete changeover to the new system, but we have to hope the new system really works because there's no going back in many cases.